session.
Okay, I think we are live on Facebook. I'll just keep checking in there. And have a good tour.
Thank you. So if anyone is out there, welcome. We're going to be starting right at 1 o'clock today. So in the meantime, please do try out the chat. We're going to be using the chat for questions, and you can type in your questions anytime, and we'll go ahead and ask them throughout the program. You can let us know too if you've ever been to the Beaty Museum before, or if you have a favorite animal or plant or other living thing. Go ahead and try out the chat. Oh, yeah. Great, so we've got Quinnell in the house here, so please do let us know where you're watching from too. You can go ahead and type that in the chat to try it out. I'm originally from Vancouver, and I'm right now in the Beaty Museum Discovery Lab.
Vincent here in Vancouver, and yeah, I'm in the Beaty Museum. I'll be giving the tour. I'm looking right at the whale right now.
Oh, that's great. Someone has enjoyed the museum a few years ago. That's great. I'm glad you're able to join us today. Okay, it looks like it's time to get started. I wanted to welcome everybody to our Beaty at Home virtual museum tour. We're going to start today with introducing ourselves. So we've got Vincent Cezanne as the main presenter today, and I am Nancy, and I'm facilitating your questions in the chat. So please do, as I said earlier, type out your questions in the chat anytime. I wanted to talk about where the Beaty Biodiversity Museum is. And so the museum is on the traditional, ancestral, unceded land of the Musqueam people. And we have their website down here is a great place to learn more about their people and their culture. So I do recommend that. And to see where we are on a map, we are here, we're in the UBC. We're in the center of UBC, and we're near several other places, such as across the street from the Pacific Museum of Earth. We are near the center where the bookstore is and the Biosciences building is. And here is what you would see if you're walking up to it. This is our building, and you can see, of course, our famous blue whale skeleton through the glass windows here, but also a building in behind there. And what that is the Beaty Biodiversity Research Center. And together with the museum, we're the Beaty Biodiversity Center. And in that center, there are over 50 researchers that are studying all sorts of interesting aspects of biodiversity. So for example, ecology, how things work together, or evolution, how things have changed over time. And so that building is there with the labs, but the museum holds the specimens. And of course, the blue whale skeleton is our biggest specimen. I think Vincent might talk about later, but we've got over 2 million specimens in the museum. They've been gathering at UBC for the last 100 years. And they are kept very safely by our curators and in these cabinets. And these cabinets are actually on the floor. So most of the collection is actually in the same room that you would walk through to see the displays here. And this is just a map of the museum. So the specimens and the collections are organized in rows like this. And when you walk up down the ramp, you're going to be underneath that blue whale skeleton. So I'm going to let Vincent take over now, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And there you go.
Thank you, Nancy. Big hello, everyone. Vincent here. And as you can see, I am standing right in front of that blue whale skeleton that Nancy was talking about. So welcome to the Beaty Museum in the Beaty Museum. So I'm going to switch to the other side so you can see what I'll be looking at, which of course, we'll start with our blue whale. Apologies for any dizziness I might cause. I will try not to move the camera too much. So the Beaty Museum, as Nancy mentioned, is attached to the Biodiversity Research Center. We've got over 2 million specimens of different biological specimens. So of course, the biggest of them being our blue whale skeleton. So our museum itself is split into several galleries. So you'll see here our different collections are represented by those different symbols. So today I thought we'd take a look at some of the different collections and some of the really extreme specimens we can find within. Because life and its diversity, its biodiversity, is a result of all these amazing adaptations adapted to different kinds of life on Earth. So any tour at the Beaty Museum, there's a pretty obvious first stop, and I'm gonna say it's the one we've already talked about, our blue whale. So does anyone know what kind of creature the blue whale is? So as I'm walking underneath this massive skeleton, this is from an animal who was 25 meters long, and when she was alive, she weighed more than 80 tons. That's more than 80,000 kilograms. One of the largest male blue whales ever found weighed almost 150 tons. To give you an idea, a full-grown African elephant can weigh 4 to 6 tons. So that could be 20 elephants to be a blue whale. So this massive size, of course, is an extreme adaptation. Now, why would being big be so good? Well, in the case of the whales, unlike other mammals, they live in the water. And when you're in the water, one thing that doesn't limit you quite as much is your mass weighing you down, because the water gives you buoyancy. And there's a lot of food in the water. In fact, there's a lot of krill, which are these small little shrimp-like organisms that the blue whale has adapted to feed on. So in this jar here, you can see, I don't know if you can see those, but we got these little shrimpy creatures. These are krill. A blue whale will eat hundreds of thousands and millions of these in one day using their baleen. They have hairy plates in their mouth, which can actually filter out the krill from the water. So this feeding method is actually very, very efficient. And basically, the bigger you are, the more efficient you are at catching food. And of course, if you're bigger, catching more food, you can grow bigger. So that's pretty extreme adaptation, being a whale filtering krill out of the water. And of course, it goes without mentioning, there's some other extreme adaptations our whale has other than just its massive size and feeding strategies. So I asked earlier, what kind of creature is the blue whale? Well, we have a mammal. Now, the blue whale is very different from most mammals. Most of the mammals look, well, they're a bit smaller, tend to be a lot hairier. In fact, hair is one of the main traits of being a mammal. So why don't we take a look at our tetrapod collection, marked by the brown feather. So these are the four-legged vertebrates, or in the case of the whale, they come from a group where they descended from a four-legged vertebrate. Now, most of the mammals, while having their own extreme adaptations, look pretty different from the whale. So as we walk down this gallery here, you will see some of our taxidermied specimens. So if you've been to the museum, you've likely seen these specimens. If you haven't, well, these are taxidermied specimens. So specimens can be the bones, they can be the furs, the skins, or in the case of taxidermy, quite a lot of them. So of course, these specimens are from animals that have died, but they have then been prepared and preserved here at the museum where they can be studied for a long time. So of course, our specimens come from different places. Any collected specifically for the museum are ones from animals that have died already, and permits will be collected. Some of them, of course, can be donations and other sources. So here we have some of the mammals. Now, I wanted to take us into our bird collection to show you a very fun bird that I think draws some interesting parallels to our whale. Does everyone see that one there? Who do we have here? We have a penguin. So the emperor penguin is a bird, much like these other specimens here. It is a feathered, beaked animal, but instead of having feathers to have wings, they have flippers. What I think is interesting about the penguin is they're not unlike the whale. They come from a group of animals who have adapted to a certain kind of life. Mammals walk on land. Birds walk and fly. But in the case of the whale and the penguin, they have both adapted to a life back in the water. And even though they are from different groups of tetrapods, they both have adapted to have similar looking flippers. Now, when it comes to funny looking birds, I wanted to show you two of my favorites. So here we see a kiwi bird, and behind it, on the left, we see a toucan. Now, these are both birds with interesting beaks. The kiwi bird is an interesting bird. It doesn't actually even have flight. Its front wings are so stubby, it cannot fly. It just walks on the ground, but it's adapted to find its food in the earth. It actually has its nostrils at the tip of its beak, which is unusual because most birds have their nares or nostrils closer to their face. But the kiwi bird has its nostrils on the tip, which it can stick in the ground and smell for bugs under the soil. Now, the toucan has that prodigiously large beak, which can help it to eat fruits from distant branches, can even grab other food like maybe a small mouse, lizard, even a smaller bird. But one of the strangest things they use their beak for is actually heat regulation. Apparently they have a lot of blood flow going through their beak, which allows them to pump warm blood so that it can radiate out and cool them down if they ever begin to overheat. Now, birds and mammals and the reptiles and amphibians that make up the tetrapods are some of the more famous animals when we think of animals. But I want to bring us to another section of our museum. Here you'll see some amazing snails, good representatives of our marine invertebrates. So marine invertebrates are animals that don't have a backbone. And well, as the word marine implies, you find them all across marine environments under the water. In fact, most animals are invertebrates. And there's one group that I wanted to talk about, and I'm talking about echinoderms. Now, what is an echinoderm? Well, the word means spiny skin, and we're talking about things like sea stars and sea urchins, sand dollars. Now, if anyone has any questions about anything you see here, please type them in the chat and I'll try to answer them. But I just want to talk a little bit about what these echinoderms can do. So these are very simple animals. They have a radial symmetry, so that means they don't really have a head. They're just sort of a star-shaped creature. And one of their amazing abilities is autotomy. Now, what is autotomy? Well, auto means self, and tomy means to cut. So they can actually cut themselves. They can sever parts of their body. So if a predator were to come and grab one of their arms, they might purposely let the arm sever so that the predator will eat that arm and the rest of the animal can escape. Now, if let's say a bear was chasing me and I had to throw something away to distract it, that seems like that would make sense. And I see a question. Could you use that word for lizards who drop their tails? You most certainly could. So anytime an animal will purposely lose a limb or part of itself so that a predator will go for that instead of, well, killing the whole animal, that would be autotomy. Now, one difference between a lizard and our sea stars is that sea stars can fully grow those arms back, and give them a few weeks, a few months, it'll be back to normal. Now, in the case of a lizard, they can grow their tail back, but it will actually be made of cartilage. It won't have the full bone. You need stem cells to regrow parts of your body, and the sea star has a much simpler body structure, so it can recover and regenerate to a much more drastic degree. Now, as we make our way through our plant collection, I think one thing worth noting is plants actually give our animals a run for their money when it comes to their ability to regenerate. Plants have stem cells all over their structures and can grow stems and leaves from all parts of their body, roots. They're quite amazing. Now, there's one very strange adaptation on a plant I want to talk about, and I'm talking about carnivory, eating meat. Now, what makes a plant is that it photosynthesizes. That means it absorbs sunlight for energy. But some plants, like this pitcher plant here, or the sundew up here, these ones are actually carnivorous. So they still photosynthesize. That means they still get their energy from sunlight. But in their cases, well, the soil they grow in is quite nutrient poor. So they need to get a supplement for their nutrients. I liken it, to oversimplify it a bit, to, well, taking your vitamins. Now, in the case of our pitcher plant, it has a little pitcher, this section here, filled with a fluid where flies and other insects will fall in, and they'll digest them and absorb nutrients from them. The sundew has sticky tendrils, insects get stuck to them, and then they coil up and absorb nutrients from them. So while they're not eating the insects for their main energy, they still get that from photosynthesizing sunlight, they do need extra nutrients, and so they have adapted the ability to be carnivorous. Now, of course, insects have a lot to worry about when it comes to predators. We just learned that even plants might be looking out for them. But a lot of animals, of course, eat insects. And actually, if you take a look, we are in our entomology collection. And I want to bring us to some interesting examples of defending yourself. So anyone here ever been stung by a bee or a wasp? Not a pleasant experience. Now, if you know anything about bees and wasps, you know what colors to avoid. Those warning colors, black and yellow. Now, bees and wasps have what we call honest signaling. They are honestly telling you we are dangerous. They have a painful sting, which their predators learn to avoid them because. Now, these 5 insects down here, despite looking a lot like a bee or a wasp, are actually quite harmless. Well, all but one. Can anyone figure out which one of these would actually be able to sting you? Now, if you look, A is a beetle, B is a honeybee, C is a hoverfly, D is a moth, believe it or not. It doesn't look much like one, but it actually is. And E is the yellow jacket wasp. So, I got that wrong, actually. There are 2 stinging ones here. So you might be familiar with our honeybees, and you might be familiar with yellow jacket wasps. These can indeed sting. They have a venomous barb that can inject venom. While the longhorn beetle, hoverfly, and moth, well, they actually are harmless. They have not adapted that same defensive mechanism to sting a potential predator. However, they have adapted to have Batesian mimicry. That is the name given when they adapt to look like a dangerous organism. So they have the same black and yellow striping pattern, which will tell predators this is the danger color. And so even though they are not venomous, by virtue of looking like an animal that is venomous, they have adapted to defend themselves. So what's really neat about this is, well, it's kind of a lie, but it is a very effective strategy because, hey, you don't need to be venomous, but everyone thinks you are. So there we go. Now, I've shown you a little quick look at some of the different adaptations you can find amongst our animals here at the Beaty Museum, even some of our plants. Now, when it comes to adaptations in nature, they can get pretty extreme as we learn the different ways life has to survive on Earth. For every living thing, there's a different strategy for surviving on Earth. Now, I showed you a really quick tour through our galleries, showing you some of them here. I might show you a few more neat little stories, but I did want to make sure if anyone had anything in particular they wanted to look at, to make sure to mention it in the chat so we can point those out to you. I'm going to actually walk towards a section where we have some fossils, maybe point out some things that have not adapted to our current Earth. So as we move into our fossil collection, let's see there we go. You will see we have specimens covering all kinds of plants and animals, life on Earth before. Now, of course, an adaptation doesn't just mean you're the best. It means you're adapted to a specific niche, a specific environment. Now, sometimes environments change. For example, the animal that left these prints is no longer found on Earth. Now, you might be thinking, well, those are pretty big. Now, I do want to point out, not as big as our blue whale, but these are trackways made from fossilized footprints left behind by dinosaurs that walked across British Columbia millions of years ago. Now, Earth has changed. The climate changed. We have evidence of a large meteor impact, and this meteor impact would have changed Earth. It would have changed the environments. The cloud of dust blocking the sun, changing everything, and not everything was able to adapt. These large dinosaurs could not adapt to this new environment. And while we do have evidence of them walking our Earth, there are no more living ones. They went extinct. They could not adapt. But not all of them, actually. Some of our dinosaurs actually made it through. Now, these dinosaurs are the ancestors of our modern birds, who, of course, adapted all sorts of lifestyles. We saw the difference between the penguin and eagle, all these different birds. But yes, some of our dinosaurs survived, and their descendants adapted a different lifestyle. They became a lot smaller. And those feathers they had allowed for flight. Very different life from some of the large, massive, scaly dinosaurs. But these were the adaptations that helped them to survive in a new environment. So of course, we see life has to adapt in different ways. And of course, it's not an individual who adapts. When we say adaptation in biology, of course, referring to over many, many generations, a population will adapt. So it wasn't the one dinosaur who changed to a bird, but over many generations, its descendants eventually adapted to that lifestyle. Now, of course, some things like our dinosaurs went extinct many millions of years ago. Some things, of course, are much more recent. Can anyone think of something that went extinct more recently? Well, there are some that were in danger of it. For example, that kiwi bird we looked at earlier, they're actually quite endangered, unfortunately. Oh, I see some great examples of things that have gone extinct. And by great examples, I mean unfortunate. I saw someone mention mammoths. So yes, mammoths are an organism that have gone extinct. They were a lot more recent. The passenger pigeon, very recent. That was actually only in the last couple hundred years. So unfortunately, some things have gone extinct while we are here. So I walk down this hallway, you'll see our timeline on the left showing time on Earth from when the Earth started until present day. And I am actually going to walk us towards our passenger pigeon in one of our displays. And as I'm making my way there, again, I want people to think if there's anything in specific that they wanted to see here in the museum. We, of course, welcome you to visit us in person. But even if you are unable to at the moment, well, I hope this tour has given you a chance to, well, take a look at what we have here at the museum. You can see, of course, our amazing cabinets. Now, if you're wondering what's behind the doors that I didn't look at with no windows, as mentioned, we are also the research collection. So what that means is our scientists who are studying different organisms will actually open these up, take out some of those 2 million specimens to help them with their research. And in there are more and more specimens to aid with that research. The samples I'm showing you, of course, are just a very small smattering of the amazing collection we have here. Do I have a favorite group of organisms in the museum? I think one of my favorite are some of our marine invertebrates, as we looked at earlier. As I mentioned, these animals are often less considered, considering that they are actually most of the animals on Earth. One that I find very interesting are, of course, some of our mollusks. I mentioned the snails earlier, actually, and I wanted to show you one, since we're mentioning some favorites. These here are carrier shell snails. Not only do they have the hard shell of a snail that protects them, they also have other shells attached to them. So an adaptation they have is, well, as their shell grows, they actually fuse other shells to camouflage themselves to look like, well, a pile of empty shells instead of a delicious snail. And they certainly are ready for Halloween with their costumes. And if you really think about it, they're a snail shell covered in empty snail shells. They're covered in snail skeletons. They're covered in bones. Very Halloween ready. And so, yes, as I mentioned, I wanted to show us our passenger pigeon. So as we move by, some more of our skulls, and you'll see some eggs. They're really big. So to give you an idea, that white one there is a chicken egg. This really big egg is from the elephant bird, which is extinct. It was even bigger and more massive than our ostrich, which would have laid that egg there. But you may have heard of the passenger pigeon before, and I wanted to show you one. If you look, you will see that gray bird, the orange breast, is a passenger pigeon. Across North America, there were billions in the sky. They were so plentiful, and within a century of humans from Europe interacting with them, well, we don't see them anymore. They were overhunted. So even something that seems limitless can actually go extinct. Now, I don't want to end on a bad note. I do want to point out that sometimes we can actually do something about this. Anyone recognize that bird there with the yellow beak, white head, brown body? the bald eagle, of course. Now, the bald eagle was actually in danger of going extinct. Chemicals used in pesticides used on crops were actually getting into the ecosystem, and eventually it would get their way from insects getting poisoned by it, let's say mice, rabbits eating them, and then let's say different animals eating them, and eventually the eagle eats it and gets the poison in their body, and it would make their shells on their eggs malformed, and they weren't able to have chicks. Now, what happened was people thought, well, we can't let the bald eagle go extinct, so they banned that chemical. They found alternatives. They made sure that no one used it. And as the chemical was no longer being introduced to the ecosystems, over time, the eagle populations are able to recover. So I think this is a great example that with action, we humans are able to help these animals here. Now, with that, I wanted to ask, is there anything else people wanted to see from our collections? Well, if not, I'm going to continue showing the things that I find fascinating. While we're here at the birds, I thought I talked about the flippers of our penguins, so their wings, if you will. Now, I mentioned earlier that our birds are the descendants of dinosaurs, and I often say they don't really look like what we think of dinosaurs, but if you look at their feet, you can actually see, I often say that's the part of the bird that sort of remained the most dinosaur-like. There's a really funny one here, actually. The wattled jacana. It's the one right in the middle there. It's small. It's got the long, spindly legs. And if you look, its toes are as long as a whole segment of its leg. They have really long, spindly toes. And they actually use them as they walk over the surface of the water. They have lily pads and other floating leaves. And since their toes are so spread out, they can actually walk on them and walk on lily pads over the water's surface. So it's really neat to see these different kind of adaptations helping these animals to survive. Yeah, so those are some pretty long toes on a pretty small bird. And well, of course, the toes of your bird can tell you a lot. Our bald eagle, for example, has the sharp talons, which are useful for tearing through flesh, and they can even grab onto something as heavy as a salmon and pick it up. We also have webbed feet. So on these geese here, you will see that between their toes, they have the webbed skin, which help them, of course, to paddle. Next to them, we have a ptarmigan, which has snowshoes. The big surface area helps them to walk on snow. So these are some pretty amazing tools and different adaptations to help our organisms to survive. So this has been a look at the Beaty Museum, some of our extreme adaptations. Now, if there's anything people wanted to see, please let us know. If not, I'm going to pass the time to Nancy right now to tell you a little bit about what's coming next week.
Okay, great. So as we're just finishing up here, feel free to just go ahead and type in a request or a favorite group of animals or a question in there. But if no one has any, I'll go ahead and wrap up the session. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here. It looks like there aren't any on Facebook either. So let's go ahead and finish up here. So, okay. So can you see that, everyone? Okay. So there's our questions. I just wanted to say that if you are looking for a way to support the Beaty Biodiversity Museum, we have a couple of links there, our donation link and our membership link. And next week, we have another museum tour. We have Angela with us at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, September 30th. So I hope you are able to join us then too, or let other people that you know about that. And we'd love to also hear any input that you have about our online programs. And there is a link there on the screen if you're interested in sending us some feedback. Please do also add in your comments on Facebook or Zoom as well, and we'll see those. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And I think we'll let Vincent, if you have any last thoughts to say goodbye.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, it's just a quick look at some of the specimens we have here. Just see the amazing variety you find in life on Earth. And again, we just have, let's look here. Oh, I have a question from Facebook. Do we have a spider collection? We actually do. In our entomology collection, we have a bit of the spiders. Unfortunately, they're not really much to look at due to the fact that spiders are stored in small little vials. But I do want to point out that Dr. Wayne Madison is a researcher who specializes in jumping spiders. He's kind of like the jumping spider expert, and he works right here in the Biodiversity Research Center. There's a lot of cool research going there. And as for the specific spiders we see around here, I'm not sure what those are, but luckily, a collection like this, people can use those to help ID them. I would highly recommend checking out different field guides and use those to see if you can figure out what's there. I know there's a little too much for my comfort, the amount of spiders I've been finding in my apartment.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that, if you're interested in spiders in particular, Dr. Madison, Wayne, he has a website where he's photographed every jumping spider he's ever looked at. And so there are thousands and thousands of images. And he's, since he's come out with the most recent phylogenetic or a tree of life kind of organization of them, they're organized in that evolutionary taxonomic way as well. So you could search for jumping spiders, Wayne Madison, and it'd come up right away. Thank you. Oh yes, there you go. Thanks, Nicole. Okay. All right, we're gonna wrap it up. If anybody is still in here, you can go ahead and leave the meeting on your own. And we'll see you next time, hopefully. Bye-bye. Thanks again.